Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much coming here for this discussion we have together in here, and to share space, share time, and share thoughts together in here. Thank you very much, Nicholas, that you're here, and Suy Lan as well. As already mentioned, the talk is in English. I hope this is fine so far for you. To give you just short overview, we will start with Nicholas and discuss a little bit his work, and then come together and think together about practices of decoloniality, which are quite complicated and demanding, even the word we already discussed before. And you are also invited to share your thoughts and share questions in here as well, which we will then have in a little bit later part of the discussion. But feel free to think about your questions, comments you would like to bring in, and don't feel intruded by this situation with microphones and sitting here and attention and so on. We have the same feeling as you, so we share also this feeling. And feel free then to come in and think about, if you're not that familiar with talking in public and so on. I have also some paper in here. You can also write down your question when it's okay for you. And the question can also be in German as well. You see my English also quite rocky, so don't fear a problem with the languages. Okay, Nicolas, we had the opportunity already to delve a little bit into the room you created. Maybe it's not only an exhibition. For me, it was like a space of experiences, because there's a lot of all my senses had been totally drawn into this room. So, what was the idea you had behind creating a place, calling us in with the name of Utopia, but then confronting us with a dystopia?
I think for me, when we are trying to search for a sense of paradise, usually as humans, regardless of me being an artist, we always look at that which we want without necessarily having a discourse with ourselves, in the sense that there can always be the flip side of that, right? And being a migrant, specifically coming from the continent of Africa, the notion or narratives that is always painted about how the Western world is, it's usually regards to a place of abundance, And if you haven't come, or if you haven't experienced this side of life, you wouldn't really see the total opposite of that, right? So for me, having this lived experience, I think it was really important to look into those two, like looking at the utopia that we are trying to seek, and the dystopia, which is pretty much incoherent to the utopia itself, right? And because it's my lived experience, being a person, or rather a foreign body, it was really important to try to look at the contrast between both, because it's kind of a paradox. And I felt like it was really relevant to title, or Anna and I thought it was relevant to title this show Utopia Dystopia, so that people kind of relate to the work closely, not just because I'm a person of a different space, but also because it's just a lived experience of any other person. Yeah.
And it's not only about lived experiences, it's also about passaging, being a passenger, being in passages. What does this topic of passages how is this important in your work, and how do you think about moments of passaging?
I feel like movement is inevitable in any ways, right? And it can be not just physical and moving from one point to another, but it can also be in processes of being generally, even as a person. And I feel like we are all in a process of transition somehow. And so I feel like personally also coming to Germany tremendously changed the way I practice art, because the environment also changed that. And my ideas also somewhat changed because of this. So I feel like the aspects or essence of passages plays a really big role, and that's why I also kind of find interest in working with motorized works as well. Because on one hand, it again brings up the so-called notion of how people see Germany, for instance, back home as a place or as a country that is known for ingenuity a lot, and for its products such as cars and all this automotive world. So that's where the motorization comes, you know, on the one hand. And on the other hand, I also look at it as an inevitable point whereby people constantly shift and change in so many different ways, you know. It's a metamorphosis to some extent. Yeah.
Yes, I think it's interesting then maybe to later to go a little bit more into this metamorphosis topic you mentioned. But then there's an interesting experience when you go into the room. I mean, there are the doors, which is definitely the strongest experience you have immediately. But then also like behind the doors, there's a lot of paperwork in there. And you called this paperwork rite de passage.
Yeah,
what does it mean?
From where I come from, or how I learned it in school, rite of passage is just basically a ritual or process in certain communities or ethnic groups whereby people act a certain activity as a way of transitioning from either being a child to an adult in most cases. So, for example, circumcision is like a rite of passage whereby individuals who are circumcised are considered adults, you know, in this case. So that can be a rite of passage. And so in this work specifically, I was trying to look at it in a bureaucratical sense, because that's, I think, one of the things that most people confront when they come to, say, Germany, for instance, you know. So at the time I was producing the work personally, I had gone through a really long time of trying to find artistic language, especially now that I changed geographical space, being that I'm not living in Kenya anymore. And I couldn't really tell the stories of home because I'm not home, so it wouldn't be as authentic. And I also couldn't tell the stories of Germany because I'm not German, and I don't have the experience yet. So my very first introduction into my practice naturally became based on my experience as a foreigner, which is bureaucracy. And so is the papers you need to get into the space. It's basically the visa that you need. You know, all this, you know, there's a lot of this. And I was like, okay, instead of going all through these brutal ways and complaining about it, why not work towards it, you know, as a way of dealing with it? Yeah, and so that kind of was the path of how my art practice developed until now. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And also the doors coming to that, I was trying to look at language, and especially how language is a bit one of the first form of classification of people. Also, according to Nicholas Luhmann, who is a German philosopher, who considered that as so. And he pointed out that if you put people in a room who are speaking different languages, they literally start regrouping based on the language they speak. So naturally, that's how racism for him starts, not even based on skin, but pretty much language. Mm-hmm. So the doors for me became really crucial as a visual format, because at first I didn't really want to work with audio, because then that creates the barrier of communication and understanding. And I wanted to speak with metaphor that really resonates with people, right? And so in my language, there's a term called jadot, which means person of one's own door. So when someone of my tribe meets another person of the same tribe in a place that is not a Luo jurisdiction. So naturally, they just call each other Jadot, person of my door. And so directly, it means it already classifies them as one and immediately exclude every other person who's not. And so this is how I decided to use the door as a way of showing that, and also it's a visual format that anyone else can relate to regardless. Yeah. Yeah.
And to stay a little bit also with the work you made with the paper work, so you shared a lot of your own experience in your in trying to come through these doors into Germany through the paperwork, and this is definitely one of the maybe materials or like starting points you wouldn't imagine for a creative process. So, but you choose it for a process of contrastation, and you started to draw yourself inside this. So, how does it develop? Did you really do it? Started it like when you have the paper before you and you didn't know how to fill out all these boxes and all these questions or so? Was it this personal?
I think the way I saw them is I assumed like the papers were a representation of me in different lights or in different ways, right? Because this is me in a way of a visa, meaning I'm here by law, you know, or legally in that light. And this was also me in regards to medical situation when it comes to the Versicherung. And this is me, meaning that I have an address when it comes to Anmeldung. So I felt like this was like different mugshots of the same person, so to speak. And so what I did, I decided to sketch myself, and most of the images were me here in Hamburg. And I then scanned it, you know. So I scanned the drawings and then printed the drawings on the actual documents, because I wanted it to be part of the document, you know. So for me, this was like a way of creating a dialogue between myself and the document. Only that the document itself is a depiction of a person without a face, but only with names. So I wanted to put a face on it. Yeah, so this is how I was looking into it.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. It is also mentioned like in the entrance for the exhibition that every one of us, everybody of us is some kind of an archive. So we carry around with us an own archive of maybe experiences, of passages. And the question also in an archive, so to create a space where something recedes, so that's not fluid, doesn't go away and so on. How did you came to this insight that our bodies are archives, and how is art or your artistic work supporting the opening of this archive maybe?
Wow, it's a tough one. I feel like I just think bureaucracy makes it an archive. It starts like this. I mean, and it goes way back to ethnological way of looking at people and classifying people and noting down what they are and their characteristics, even though it's like a really wrong thing to do in current politics or way of looking at things. So I think this is when this started, I must say, you know. And gradually we kind of also adopted it somehow, you know, because the power of ink and paper is really, really crucial, you know, and it just affects everybody's life at the moment, you know, in so many different ways, not just in documentation or archiving, but generally in even how we exchange commodities and value in terms of money, you know. It's paper, it's literally paper and ink. So I feel like that goes way back, so I can't really pinpoint it per se. Yeah, but I just find it interesting how paper and ink can literally define someone's life tremendously. And this is why I also really like working with archival materials, documents, and images as well, especially in print media. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much. And this this power of ink, of paper, maybe of documenting, of looking to somebody else and then describing and documented this person, is basically also this one what ethnographers or ethnographic collections doing, and somehow maybe this is a bridge also to you, Suy Lan, as you worked for years now in institutions which are creating this view on others, so to say. So you worked in the MARC, which is now the MARC. I don't know when you worked, if it was already the MARC or had the former title.
Well, it had the former title.
It had the former title,
and then it changed the name shortly after. So within the first 6 months or so when I worked there, it changed its name. So it was part of the process of finding the new name.
So you had quite an impact starting working there.
Yeah, and I also, when I started to work there, for me it was very important that it would change the name. So I knew that it would change the name when I started to work there, and it was very important for me also because I said, for me, it would have been very difficult to work for an ethnographic museum with the old name and do the work that I wanted to do there.
And so did first the name change and then the institution, or did the institution change and then represented itself in the name?
Well, I don't think it's so easy. It's that easy. It's not like you change the name and then the institution is different. But you can, I think, you can send a message by changing the name and by communicating that you want to do something else now with what is there, and that you actually really want to change.
And how did you experience this place when you started working there? So, and also like, I mean, you have a deeper look, not only that you work there, but you have like another accessibility as me as a visitor, for example. Because I don't see only what is in the curated rooms, so. But you saw the curated rooms, and then you saw also like the repositories, for example.
Yeah, I saw the collections and everything. I don't know, but I mean, I guess quite a few of you have been at MARC yesterday for the conference, right? So you know the space, and I mean, it's a building that has been created in the early 20th century, so around 1907, 1908. And it is a very, for me, it is a very violent kind of architecture, a very impressive kind of architecture. So you have to walk up the stairs and then you have to open a very heavy wooden big door, and then you enter a lobby that is full of marble and dark, and so it has a very, very strong visual message that it sends out. And for me, I mean, a lot of people who enter the MARC and maybe don't have marginalized experiences, I think they really like the architecture. They are really fascinated by it. They think it's, it is impressive, it's beautiful, and so on and so forth. And a lot of people that I have met and who also came to the MARC for the first time when I was working there. For a lot of people of color, also queer people, and so people with marginalized experiences, it's been a very heavy experience to enter this space, and a very violent experience. So that already differed. And I think what we tried at the beginning was, and I'm really happy that Anja, for example, is here, because I thought of what did we do to kind of engage with this kind of architecture, because it's different from, for example, here, from having a white cube. It's it's very strong in itself already. And I remember very well when we had this conference with Julia Wissert, funnily, and we had this there's a hall inside of the Mark where they usually had talks and did lectures in ethnography. And Julia Wissert, as she did the keynote with the Fluctoplasma Festival, she also did the keynote for us back then, talking about decolonization and how it is to talk inside of these spaces as a Black woman, knowing that a lot of, or most of the time of this museum, Black people have been on display and not the ones who talk inside of these lecture halls. And we had this performance where people were bringing in threads and kind of restructuring the room by pulling the thread through the room and fixing it on different points, so people couldn't walk into the room as they would usually do, because they had to kind of navigate through the threads, and it was like a red threaded web created inside of the room. So people really had to have a different bodily experience inside of the room. Because we wanted to change how you feel and how you move inside of these spaces. Mm-hmm. And I think that was a really nice way and a very easy way for this kind of situation to change.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it sounds also like really engaging of the body and also creating barriers. And maybe was this in the sense of creating confrontational situations? Was this like behind this too?
Yeah, for us, I think what I really liked about the idea was that it really, because it is such a bodily experience to enter this kind of architecture, and how do you change this bodily experience? Mm-hmm. And so I think it was a very nice way of dealing with it and changing, not only by talking about the space, but really by changing how people have to move. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. And then you also open up this room to pose a very simple question. Hamburg, you called? Hamburg, do you know Rudolf Douala Mangabell? And you started to tell a story about an injustice written on paper. So we're back on the power of paper, I think, so somehow. Could you get us in a little bit into this exhibition, and what was the idea of you, or how did you come to the idea? It is now time to pose this question quite loud and visibly here in Hamburg.
Well, the question was about the German Cameroonian colonial history, and we talked about the life and death of Rudolf Douala Mangabell, a Cameroonian king who resisted against the colonial powers, the German colonial powers, and that's actually how Nick and I also met a couple of years ago, because Nick was part of an artist collective. We invited to also have contemporary and also diasporic views on the story that is already 100 years old. And for us, the idea of the exhibition was actually something that the great-great-grandchild of Rudolf Douala Mangabell came up with when she met Barbara Plankensteiner, the director of the Mark, at a conference in the US. Mm-hmm. And they said that they wanted to have to do an exhibition on her great-great-grandfather. And just because it is such an entangled history between Cameroon and Germany, and also because the collections of the Mark had very close connections to the story as well. So that was more or less the idea why to do this exhibition here in Hamburg and at the Mark.
Mm-hmm. And what would you say? Does Hamburg now knows Rudolf Douala Mangabell?
I don't know. You have to ask Hamburg.
But what had been like to maybe for you to answer it more in a more abstract way? Had there been consequences of this exhibition or after this exhibition? Not only like in the time where you could experience the exhibition, but also had this been an influence in, I don't know, how we talk about history, for example, how to talk about the injustice, where they never had been, as you mentioned, they haven't been rehabilitated. Had there been any then further thinking of, okay, how, what to do next?
Well, I think doing these kind of things or doing exhibitions and also involving a lot of people and just making knowledge accessible to different people, I think it always does something. So I think my impression was that the catalog was well sold, because we had to reprint it even one more time. The idea behind the exhibition was from the start that it wouldn't only be shown here in Hamburg, but it would also move to Cameroon. So that was so the opening of that exhibition was last year, and it was not a one-on-one transfer from the exhibition here to Cameroon, but the princess, or the great-great-granddaughter of Rudolf Douala Mangabel, she invited 2 Cameroonian curators who basically took up what we had created here in Hamburg, and then they moved on and created their own exhibition out of what we have worked on here. So it was really an exchange of knowledge, I think, and I think that also kind of makes a change. And then another side effect, I think, of these kind of exhibitions is also that you can actually, you have a lot of resources to really look into, for example, the provenance of the objects. Because usually in museums you don't really have that much financial resources and also human resources to really look into specific objects. But if you have an exhibition, then you have a goal and you have something that you have to present at the end. So we had a lot of resources to really look into the provenance. And I think, for example, a colleague of mine from Cameroon who came here and worked with us for a year, he then moved on, for example, to a research project from Benedict Savoy, and then they wrote this book, the Atlas der Abwesenheiten, which is a very, very important publication, I think, about provenance of Cameroonian objects, and this is the basis, basically, of also asking for the return of these objects, because if you don't have the provenance, then you can't really return, or it's much, much more difficult to return the objects. So it is there are a lot of side effects, I think, that you can't really, or I wouldn't say the exhibition was the starting point, but it was another step maybe in creating knowledge and creating networks and creating opportunities for people to then from there work further or go further. And so I would also be interested, for example, for Nick, did it, I mean, you were part of that artist collective back then. Did you feel like it was something, something came out of it, or it was something important in your career to exhibit back then, for example, at the Mark?
I think if it made an impact, I wouldn't really know directly, to be honest. But it was also really weird working with an ethnological museum. And I think also coming to Germany for the first time, it was the very first museums I visited, and I felt really uneasy because it was the first time being in an ethnological museum. But it was quite an honor also to get the chance to pretty much show alongside the other artists who were showing, and just getting the experience of working with such a space. But I don't know if it really made the impact that it should have made. Yeah, this I can't really tell per se. Yeah. But I think it was important that it started creating a dialogue, especially because also the royal family came later, and it was during the last photo triennale, if I'm not wrong, and so many people got to know so much about Duala Mangabel himself, and obviously the whole context behind the exhibition and why it's relevant. So I think in that case it was really relevant that this happened, because I also didn't know about it until it happened. So it did actually make some impact in terms of creating awareness, for sure. But beyond that, I wouldn't really tell. Yeah. Yeah.
But what kind of then, how did you relate then to the story which were told there of Rudolf Mangabel and the injustices and brutality of his very personal story? What?
I mean, I think it correlates with pretty much the colonial story in any other country, I think. And also, I don't know that much, I didn't know, or still don't know that much about former German colonies per se, because only thing I would say I know is that it was quite short-lived, you know? And the impact of it in those countries I also didn't know. So my approach in that show was trying to look at it from a British, because I come from a former British colony, Kenya. So I was trying to look at it from that side and trying to see the connection in between, you know. And so in my own way of depiction, I pretty much was trying to look at the politics of the body and the women and how they played a role in creating this resistance. Because in Kenya also women played a really big role. And in Cameroon as well, women played a really huge role in this. So I tried to do some few research on my own on how they did this. And so for me, that's where the connection pretty much was. And I decided to stick to that as well. Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, we stepped like in our minds into the mark and maybe to these places of display and of representing of history, representing of knowledge. And then the question, of course, comes up. You already underlined that this is a super problematic art. It is a place. It is a place that hurts. It's a place of rapture. And what draws you still inside these places? Where comes the idea and the energy of changing these places from?
I moderated a panel last winter, and we invited two people, one from Lomé and one from and Ibrahim Mahama from Ghana, and Sonia Lawson from Lomé. She also works in one former colonial building, so it's a very, very violent structure. And I basically asked her the same question as you are asking me now, because I was like, so what do you think? Should we, if we work on decolonization, for example, shall we build new spaces, or shall we kind of reclaim these old spaces? And she was like, well, I mean, it is a structure, it is part of our history, and why not enter these spaces and rewrite the history of these spaces? Because we only know one part of the history of these spaces, and we need to know another part. So I think that was a very interesting thought for me, also how to deal with these still physical structures of colonialism, but then still it's very difficult to change these places, and I'm not completely, I'm myself going back and forth between, is it possible to change these places, or is it not possible to change these places, and should we just move out just because there's too much hurt, there's too much pain, there's too much violence in these places. So I can't really give you a very clear answer on that. But I know that, I think we need both, basically. I think we need to work within the structures, and that's also why I keep on going back to these structures. But I also think that we need to strengthen the outside structures and infrastructures, and also the groups that are independent from, for example, from the state or from state funding. We really need the independent space, because you can think and act differently in these spaces.
Yeah, and maybe it's also a question also for other people in the room, if these places can be places of change, so on. If you already have maybe some question in mind, and so just a reminder that you're also invited to join the discussion with remarks and questions as well. How's it for you, Nicholas? Do you think a museum can be a place of change?
Can be changed or can be a place of change?
Good, you pointed out too. Yeah, can it be changed? Can it be a place of change?
I mean, I think so, honestly. I really think so. And can it change? Maybe let me say if it can change. That I don't know. It's a bit hard because, like as we were talking last time, I was trying to refer that to the memoir Metabolic Museum by Clementine Delis, which is basically an experience of her own as a director of the space. And she also faced a lot of challenges trying to change it. And she thought, yeah.
Explain a little bit more, introduce a little bit to the idea of a metabolic museum.
Well, according to her, metabolic was looking at the body and the way the body kind of develops, you know, into breaking down and processes of being, right? And I think that's where the metabolic comes. And so she was trying, I think, she was trying to build that in the museum she was working in at the time, the Weltkulturen in Frankfurt. And if I remember clearly, she was pointing out how it was difficult to do that because she realized that she didn't really have the powers that she thought she has as a director of the space. And she had to face the state, because museums are state-run, right? And which, to some extent, resulted into a court case at some point, right? And can it change? That I don't know really, you know. Based on this, I can't really say it can change, you know. It will take a whole lot of energy for that. And the other question was, can it be a place of change?
Yeah.
This I agree, because I feel like it depends on the person who's in the space and what their intention really is, because I feel like the level of audience that is there is really big. And also because I feel like museum is like, let's say like a theater stage of the public performances, you know? It's a place whereby it's packaged and it's put there for people to see. It's pretty much curated what's already happening in the social and the political world. So it can actually change. I just think it depends on the intentions of the people who are working within the space. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Do we have already any questions in here? I see one hand already. Any other questions already? No? Then I hand over you the microphone. I know it's sometimes a bit strange to talk with the microphone, but it's easier for other people to hear you.
Hello. My question related to your last question, if it's a place of change, and looking at the title of the show, what, not the question if, but if we presume that it can change or that it's itself a place of change, what would be the utopian idea that we wanted to change into? And I was wondering, given the title of the show and what you've been talking about, what kind of the utopian dream would be for these institutions, and how you can, if we can already find kind of brackets that can be the starting point for that.
Does this resonate with you? I think you started to change a museum, so I think you should start then, and then we hit.
Yeah, well, I don't know if it started to change the museum, but what I can at least say what I like about curating shows, and what I think is also maybe what is maybe the power in creating and curating shows, because I think it's basically two things. One thing is that you do something together, so in a sense of you produce the exhibition together. It's never only one person who does it, even though sometimes you have one name of a curator on top of the show, but it's always a group effort, right? And so because you have the designers, you have the artists, you have the objects, you have the researchers, you have the whole production team. So it's always a collective effort. And if you open it up and you do a participatory exhibition and you also bring in more people to engage with the topic, then it is something that you really do together, and that and you create a space and a story and a narrative, which is, I think, super exciting. And it's not only talking about something, but it's really, you have to decide on a certain kind of color that you want to have the room in. You have to maybe find solutions for how to hang a picture or something. So it is also very physical in a certain kind of way. And I think this kind of doing things together is something very can be something very powerful and very and a very powerful experience and group experience, and that creates change. And I think then it has this second level that you just talked about, is once you're finished, then you have this space where people can again do things together, because you can go there and then you can engage in dialogue and you can engage with different opinions, and I think that, and you can engage in discussions, and that is again something that I think is very powerful if it's a strong narrative, or if it's strong narratives, like plural.
Thank you. How's for you, thinking about a utopian museum?
Okay.
You are the creative one, so now you ask for utopias.
Yeah, I think I agree with Suy Lan. I think it's a collective effort, for sure, because everyone is thinking about how it should look like, and everyone already have an idea of how it's supposed to look like. And considering the fact that these spaces are also donor-funded or funded per se, there's also that extent of interest as well. So how does it meet in the middle? I think it's also something that I'm also curious myself, But generally, I feel like it's a collective effort, and also somewhat who really has a strong voice in this, and not just a strong voice, but also based on their ideas at the same time. Yeah, if it does actually fit and serves everyone else who is in participant in this case. This is what I think. Yeah.
And I think there's another thing that I really like about it, is that it is a little bit like a playground, right? I mean, you have a space, and you have a certain topic, and then you can think about what is the story behind, for example, the Cameroonian German colonial history. You engage in research, you get to know things, and then you start to create what do we do with this today? So how is it related to us today? And you create this narratives, stories, but also maybe alternative worlds or alternative futures, and you can all do this in this space. So it is really a little bit like a playground, which I love about it, because you can basically do anything in these spaces. You build them. You kind of build worlds, and I think that's a little bit maybe that's a little bit like art also.
But I would contrast this with the problem that a space, even a built space, doesn't have to be a stable space. So, as we see, we can create spaces like yours, for example, or like the exhibition you're doing, but we see it quite clear and visually. The Utopia, Dystopia exhibition has an end date, for example, and then this space is away again and has to create it again and again and again. Is it also possible to create more stabilized spaces?
Well, for me, I mean, I would totally vote for and say we need stable structures, but these temporary spaces, they also have they also have something to them, because because you create temporary spaces and then imagination in there, and I think imagination is also something that is a driver for change, right? And that is, so I think that's the potential that we have also with the temporary spaces.
How is it for you? I mean, because you're doing two things basically. You're doing exhibitions, these are temporal normally, but you're creating art, and art doesn't have to be, or isn't temporary. It's temporarily displayed, but the art recedes. So is this something that happens then there? Is this a stabilized room? Is there something which supports or confrontates this temporality of counter spaces?
But I don't think anything can be really permanent per se, generally speaking, in that regard. But I feel as an artist it's good to somehow document these things. That's why also for us creating art and also learning art, it's something that you are taught how to document this. And to some extent it doesn't create the temporarily aspect of it, because then it lives on somehow, either is in written text or videos or picture formats. But then again, it's not temporary, because then it informs the other ideas or other people who will interact with these things, right? And I think same goes with the structure of museum spaces as well, you know. The fact that it's permanent means that it's always there, so people can always interact with it, you know. And whoever shows in the space don't really have to show in the space probably forever, you know. But even if that's the case, it still sparks new ideas and questions on and on. So that also breaks that temporarily moment of it. So I don't think it's, even if it's temporary in the form of physics, it's really not temporary in the form of the discourse that continues still. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Thank you for mapping this out. I saw already one other question, comment. Anyone else? Okay, over there. Good. Then we start with you, and then I come over to you.
Oops. Yeah, I suppose it's less a question than more of a comment. We've got these three aspects of change, kind of museum change. You brought in stability. Somebody brought in utopia. And I suppose I have to come out as a Hamburg-born child who got to know the museum you were talking about in the late 80s. And for me, it was even then a safe haven, because I'd started university, and to escape to the museum was a safe way to get out of uni and to escape the world, and to enter my own world, in the sense my imagination And to rest, it was 70 pfennigs to get in, so it was like less than a coffee at the Mensa. And in that sense, I think it's still stable, because I still think of museums as safe places, as places where I can escape to and enter my imagination or somebody else's, mix, blend into somebody else's imagination. And in that sense, I think, yes, a museum can change. A museum has to change, and we've had so many changes, not only in the mentioned museum, but we've had changes in the public library, which I remember from same years I was just talking about, the 80s, and it was in a different location, and it was an intimidating space, and today it's an open and welcoming, and I think in many ways utopian space. We've got a Freiraum in Hamburg at the MKG, which is a place to escape to. You don't even have to pay to get into the Freiraum, and it's a platform for so many different imaginations to mix and blend. So I don't think we need to be so critical or dystopian. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Do you want to comment on this? Does it resonate for you? Do you share the experience?
I don't know about not looking at it as a place of dystopia. I think it can be a place of dystopia still, you know, even though it's a place to run to, because some people also run to misery as a way of, you know, solace in some way. So I think the important part is that it still maintains this philosophical space whereby anyone can have an idea or interpret things in different ways, you know. And I think that's the beauty of academia, and by extension also museums, which in between that and creativity to some extent. But it doesn't mean you can't criticize the space just because you can find a place of sheltering in it, you know? Yeah. So I think it's a bit of both, really. Yeah, it's not defined.
Yeah. Maybe it's also like multiple experiences of the same place, and the question is maybe then, does all the experiences get discussed and are seen, for example? Maybe something like this. So a question over there.
Thank you. I would have a question concerning the Manga Bell exhibition. Thanks. You said that it traveled to Cameroon. And I found that proposition very interesting, that two curators came in and saw what they could make of the exhibition, what they found interesting. And could you elaborate a little bit more on that, on how they actually approached the exhibition, what they found interesting to adapt, or in what way they changed or recontextualized and also mediated, or whatever, how they approached the exhibition in their own context?
Well, unfortunately, I didn't have the opportunity to travel to Cameroon to actually see the final product, but I met the two curators at some point during their research phase, and it was definitely that they. For them, I think it was really interesting to have the exhibition as a starting point. So as I said, I think one very important aspect of the exhibition was that we were able to, for 1.5 to 2 years, to really get to the archives, to have a Cameroonian colleague here in Hamburg to open the archives, to look into the collections, to do provenance research, to bring together different biographies, because we didn't only look into Rudolf Douala Manga Bell's biography, but we also looked into 2 other biographies very closely. and to collect all this knowledge. And especially my Cameroonian colleague, he also went to different collections and looked into other Cameroonian collections, for example, in Stuttgart and in Berlin. And so all this knowledge was, I think, a great starting point for them. And then they came to see the exhibition and looked at the art, at the way how we presented everything. And chose from the objects that we already selected for this exhibition, because we had agreements already with different museums about the objects and the loans. And so they kind of selected what would be interesting for them. And more or less parallelly, there was another really interesting exhibition, the curators here too, at the Museum der Arbeit, which focused more on the trade connections and also on the materials that were traded during colonial times, and so they also went there and looked at their research and then kind of brought everything together.
And we had a question over here.
You mentioned the perception of Kenyans, to Germany and of Germans in the beginning. Would you made differences to that exhibition if it would be in Kenya?
I honestly think so. Yeah, I honestly think so. Because then, but also it depends if I was in Kenya, not have experience living in Germany, or if I was in Kenya having gone back from Germany. Definitely those two would have been different point of views, I believe. Because then if I was viewing it as a Kenyan living in Kenya and not having the German experience, then I would be looking at it as almost probably the typical Kenya. I don't know really. And if I was going back, I would be probably leaning towards the politics of return in this case. So I totally agree it would have been different, yeah.
And maybe that also relates to another question, and I would be interested in what you say, because with the Hey Hamburg exhibition, we had a similar question on would it be the same exhibition here, or quite a lot of times when we presented the exhibition outside of the Mark, then people ask if the exhibition moves to Cameroon, will it be exactly the same? And I think for all of us, it was very clear right from the start that it couldn't be the same. Also because during the preparation process, it was clear that we have a completely different context here in Hamburg and in Germany, and so we will focus on different aspects of the story. Than the princess would do when she moves the exhibition to Cameroon. For example, we kind of presumed that most people here wouldn't know anything about Rudolf Douala Mangabell and about the colonial history of Cameroon, and so we had to tell this part of the story, whereas it was clear that wouldn't be. It's a very different situation in Cameroon again, and so there, I think, and then I also had the impression, because for example, we engaged in a lot of discussions also with you as an artist collective, mainly speaking from a diasporic perspective, and then also having the princess and also other people who are Cameroonians living in Cameroon and also and just being here for a certain time for the exhibition, and what they wanted what their interest was in the exhibition and what they would like to focus on, and I've had. My impression was that it was not so easy to navigate in some parts of the exhibition process, just because sometimes it was really different, and again what the museum wanted with the exhibition was different again. So so I think it's a very interesting question that you asked.
Any other question? Maybe already in the room you like to share, comment.
Thank you. I really would like to add that there is a difference between this white cube and the museum like the Mark. And I would wish that after an exhibition like yours, in the Mark, there would be changements on different areas. And this I would like to have in every similar place. So this is different white cube. It's empty afterwards and somebody can come new and can put new things there. Great. But a place like the Mark should be changed after an exhibition like yours. And not only in the archives, so that they are maybe now the materials are better together or connected with other things. This is great, but it's normal. I read from a museum, I forgot the name, in, I think, Norway, where a group of artists from another African state came into an exhibition and just changed the exhibition because it was not good for them to be friendly to the thing. And I think the director, the female director of the house, thought that's okay, they should do it, but made a sign. So this is a changement what I would like to have more often. And yeah, this was the thing.
I want to add that, you know, there are a lot of changes in museums. It's so important to mention it. And, you know, especially in places like ours, it's, you know, very experimental. We don't have a collection. So there are so many different profiles, right? We can't compare our space to Mark, right? Or MKG. It's a complete different profile. And it takes time. So even though you are thinking about changements and you're already working on it, it takes time. So it's not visible, you know, within a year or 2 years. Sometimes it takes 5 or 10 years, right? So that you see the changes the whole team decides on. And this is, in our space, we can really work very fast, and because it's only one exhibition hall, so we can decide very fast on change. Yeah, I think this is very necessary to think of.
You would like to interact with the two comments?
I think I'm fine. What I'm still thinking about is what you said about the temporality and stability, and that you think you do a lot of temporary projects, but what is important is that that it is documented, and it kind of brings me back to the question of the archive that you asked at the beginning. Because so how do we remember what we have worked on, and how important is the archive or the collection? And I think that is something that I think is very important, because yeah, that way you kind of you kind of circumvent the temporality of the projects.
What proceeds for you actually after an exhibition? So what is after an exhibition for you? Is there, you do the documentation process for yourself, but is there anything else which lasts after an exhibition? And is it creating a ground for something else to come?
That's a good question. I think it's a really hard for any artist, really. But I think what happens ideally is the post-production, you know, documentation of the work and whatnot. But I think the best thing would happen is most artists don't do this, but write about it or write an essay about it, because I feel like documents or text really kind of live on somehow. But also, if you really focus on the practice and make the best out of it, it lasts in memory, I think. So, there's also the aspect of really putting a lot of effort and time in making a really good work, and that will always speak for itself, So for me, I think that's also one way of making the work live on, if it's not documented or written about. It's just maximizing the potential to the fullest. And if it's a good work, then it will live on naturally. Yeah.
But maybe it's also a question for you as well. I come also over to you, but maybe it's also a question for us as audience, as visitors, as people which are going into the spaces, because we're also a part of the interaction. So the question maybe is also for us and for us all, and maybe if you would like to comment somehow, what does receipts in you when, for example, seeing Nicholas' work or going to museums and seeing the work you are doing, for example. So what do we carry out of this, and how do we relate to the spaces, the art, the questions you create? So yeah, I don't know, maybe if you like, you can think about it, and it would be definitely interesting if you like to share what you're thinking about this. But before, we had already somebody with a question. So you don't have to answer this question, you can come up with your own question.
Thanks. I'd like to comment a little bit the comment. So my question is if you think that a white cube art space is neutral, even if it's very close to the main station.
I'd like to comment on some of the questions that were raised before. I work as a curator in one of those institutions, and I totally see the point that change within these institutions can take far too much time, or at least can take far too much time to become visible, so that people can get the impression that you have temporary exhibitions and then they are gone again and nothing's happened. But from a curator's point of view, I would say exhibitions like this become part of the institution's history. And there is a certain degree of conscience about there has been this exhibition and it has changed how we as curators or the staff or the people working in the in the museum and the visitors and people who work at the cashiers and people who the cleaning team and so on and so on. It becomes part of the history that we all perceive when we look at the exhibition. And I know it's not always really visible or not always spectacular, but still I would like to make this small optimistic point and say that it's not just gone after the exhibition, the actual exhibition is gone. There's a grain somewhere that is somehow put inside the exhibition, and that is, I'm not going to move that image too far, but something is going to grow from that, even if it's not visible, not really spectacular or always visible.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's not only visible, but you still need people to take care of the grain. I think if I may move a little bit further with your metaphor, because if there's nobody who takes care of the grain or the seed that you have planted inside of the institution with the exhibition, then it can also die, right? And so I think, and maybe that is also one more answer to your question: why is it what makes me keep on going and working inside of these institutions, because I think it needs people, or I kind of feel responsible for also going back and and kind of taking care of the seed and also trying to open up the doors for more people to come in and take care of that seed, because it is never, I mean, as with the exhibitions, it is never something that you can do alone. You always need more people. It is, in the end, very much a question of how many bodies with different experiences are inside of these institutions. You can't just always temporarily bring in people and then get rid of them again. You really have to bring them inside of the staff. Then they need to become part of the institution. Because if not, then it doesn't change. Because in the end, I think everything comes down to that people do all these things. People make these decisions. People kind of move everything. So you need a diverse staff with different experiences inside of these institutions to take care of these seeds and to plant new ones. So it's a garden and not only one tree.
Okay.
I would like to add, if it's not an archive, I think it will take time as part of the dystopia. We have to remember this, because time is always a question, but the question is also, when we not take this time we have to change and think it has to go step by step by step, then, well, it's not okay for me.
Yeah, and then there was also this your question, Susanne, about are white cubes neutral spaces? Of course they are not, but it's maybe more a question maybe to Anna, because she works in a white cube. I've never worked really for a white cube. I've always worked within these institutions that are very, there is just a lot of preset already inside of these institutions, and the architecture and everything is kind of has already history. And I mean, at the moment, I'm responsible for the oldest church building in Berlin. So it's like 800 years old almost, and it's very, very kind of coded with hundreds of years and with codes connected very closely to religion, to church, and so on and so forth. So I can't really talk about that, but maybe you want to add something to white cubes.
So it's definitely not neutral. It's, as you already answered, it's a teamwork and a vision and a focus, right? And only in a teamwork we can bring things up, and also the co-work with the artists. It's super necessary for our space, of course. And so, definitely not. And but it's great fun.
Just shortly wanted to mention, if you have a question in mind, would be a good moment to raise your hand, because we're getting to the end of of our event in here. And I would also ask you the same. Also, how is it for you to exhibit in a white cube, and don't talking about the color of the walls, I'm talking about the audience. Are these places for you for change? Is it because who's visiting and interacting in here in this place and also in these institutions, for example?
I think spaces like this actually, I feel change a lot, and that in a museum, if you consider that in a museum, I feel like museum, like you've said, it's quite slow in adjusting, and I don't know if it's because of the bureaucratical ties that it has based on history itself, because I feel like spaces like this change a lot, considerably. There's like exhibitions after exhibitions every month, 2 months, 3 months. There's activities. Like Kunsthaus, for instance, it's ever moving. And and this question goes to you, Suy Lan, and maybe you, Sandra, as well. Since you guys have been curators or are curators of certain spaces, if it moves that slow, right? If it's so arduous like this, right? Then what does it mean to change jobs from that one museum to another museum? What's the initiative of this change of this job if it's that slow and if it's almost not visible to see, then do you move to the other job because of increase of digits, or is it because there's a new challenge, in this other place, or you feel like you can do better in this other space? Because if people can't see it because it's that slow, I'm curious, really. Then, yeah, how do you then transition to another similar space?
Well, I think it's more banal than that. It's just I've always had temporary contracts. So also the staff structure is varied, right? Some people have lifetime contracts, and they have their lifetime contracts from the start. And then, as I don't have the very traditional museum career, and I also kind of came into the museum because of the topics that I'm interested in, and my job at the museum was actually a job, or my task was to help the MARC to change and to open up towards certain communities, towards certain parts of the society, to also look at the structure and to change it. So it was a job profile that didn't exist before. And so it was a temporary contract. And then again, when I worked at the Ministry for Media and Culture here in Hamburg, it was again a temporary project because they wanted something to change, and then so they created a job that was targeted at that, and gave me 3 years to do the change. So and then again I had another short-term contract at the museum. So I was kind of forced to move from job to job. And I think with the changes with the museums, you also have people like me, and I know quite a lot of colleagues who have this, or who are in the same situation. You are kind of sandwiched between the old staff or the long-term staff and the ones who demand change of the museums. And then you get kind of thrown into the situation, and you have to navigate between the institutional requirements, and then also and then your own moral obligations, and the ones that you want to open these institutions up to. So, and then usually you don't have that much time.
Share your feelings and thoughts.
Well, maybe then this makes sense why it changes slowly, or almost seen as it's not changing really, right? Because then it means that the one giving the contract then knows that they probably don't want it to change, and shuffles you guys around, so that you don't have intimacy with it and not feel like you really want to do something to it. I don't know.
Well, I think it's more complicated, because my experience with the 3 different institutions now is actually that there is a part of the staff that really wants the change, and they're super, super happy that somebody comes in with a certain kind of expertise, and they support these people and create an environment where you can really think about new things. And then there's one part of the staff, to simplify it, but there's one part of the staff, they are not interested in the change because there's nothing in it for them in the change, because it was good as it was. And so I think it's not that easy, right? It's not like people don't want to change, and then you are basically just, you're just Feigenblatt or something. I think people do want the change, and then they support it. But there are also people who don't.
So how does it sound for you? Utopian or dystopian?
Much more dystopia than utopia, unfortunately. Yeah. Wow, that's. But then, how do you think like you have to convince these individuals to adapt to the change, or then? Why do they have you there then? I'm just curious, like, if they don't really want the change and they're bringing in, expertise in these spaces, then why are you there? Is it bookkeeping, or what is it? Like, I'm just
well, I think it's a lot about power structures. So it's about power structures within the institution. So who can drive for the change and who can't. And that's why I also think it's very important to have an outside of the institution that also kind of puts pressure and kind of shifts the power relations, how things are debated, because the institution can't just be on its own, right? If people if the society demands that you really have to, you can't carry on the way you did. I mean, then there's also pressure that kind of gets inside of the institution, and that also shifts the power structure. So it is complicated, but that's why I think you have to work from a lot of different spaces and from different places to kind of shift the balance.
Reminds me somehow a little bit of your installation, because like there's a door, but then it moves away, and it moves away in the next second. So yeah. So, but maybe the opportunities are also temporal, and also this coming together is also like temporal. But we can try to make the most out of it, to be present with each other, and also to weave a web of solidarity and support, maybe to create more ideas of intervening and of facing colonial, post-colonial structures which are still there and everywhere. I mean, also when we talk about the funding all the time and the money, where does the money of Hamburg actually comes from? So we are then back on this. But maybe then it can be a starting point for creating some reveling thoughts on interventions, and maybe also of subversive interventions and so on. But as planning of subversive interventions are normally that made with this microphone, I first want to say thank you, Ruth, for coming here and having this discussion. Thank you all for sharing your thoughts and ideas with us and having this time here together. I hope that there are some more interventions arise from here, and we would end this sitting face-to-face situation now, and creating hopefully another more close social situation to talk a little bit more, maybe also to go with you to the exhibition room if you have time and still headspace for this, and plan some other next practices of facing and criticizing and hopefully overcoming colonial power structures. Thank you very much for being here. Enjoy Fluctoplasma as well, enjoy the exhibition, and have a nice evening.